Alright guys, hey, welcome back to another Unreal Engine 4 blueprint tutorial. In this tutorial what we're going to do, we're going to create a blueprint door. It was requested by someone in the comments saying, hey, can you make a door blueprint? So why not? It's pretty easy. But since it's a little too easy, I wanted to make it interesting and challenging for myself and so you guys can learn some things. This is going to be a two-part video tutorial series. The first part is we're going to create a blueprint door, which will have two different types of functionality. One is you could just walk up to it, door will open in the right direction, you go through it, and then it will close correctly. The second way is basically you walk up to the door, a widget appears saying, press E to interact. You press E, and then it opens, and then you walk through and it'll close. And it'll work in both directions. That's going to be the first part. The second part of the video is actually going to get that same blueprint, but working in multiplayer. So I'm going to make sure that these videos, I'm going to try, they should be uploaded at about the same time. So if you want to watch one over the other, if you want to watch just the multiplayer part, watch that instead. If you want to watch both, they'll be there for you. And this video strictly is just, single player server side, only one player interacting with this door. We're going to create the blueprint from scratch, and the next video we'll do the multiplayer stuff. So just to show you what we're going to make today, we have it, you walk up, door opens, walk through, door closes, and then go back, and there you go. And then we'll have this interact boolean right here, make that true, walk up to it, press E to open door, press E, widget goes away, do it again, and there you go. So that's what we're going to make today. Just to let you know, we're working in Unreal Engine 4.15.1. I got the first person template and starter content. So let me get rid of this old door. Let's go into our content browser. I just have a folder for widgets. I'm just going to create a new blueprint class, make it an actor, call it BP underscore. I'm going to call it new door just because I already have one called door. Save it, open it up. And we're going to need a couple of components. First component is going to be a door frame, so let's do static mesh, call it door frame, and let's go into the static mesh and look for door frame. I believe that comes in with the starter content, so SM underscore door frame. We got that. For the purposes of this video, I need to have it scaled 1.25 in all axes, so make sure you do that. Everything else could be the same. Next we need the actual door mesh, so let's get another static mesh in here. We'll call it door. And then go to the static mesh, type in door. SM door is what we want. And here, in the Y for location, 45 should be a good enough number. So just center it really, just because, luckily enough with this mesh, its pivot is where we want it, so we could just rotate it like that. So just make sure it's centered as best as you can like that. And now that we have that, we need one last thing, and that's actually collision. So let's find a box collision. We'll call it door collision. And for this, we'll need the following values. In the Z, we'll make it 120 centimeters in location Z. And then we'll make it for box extent 200 will be, X will be 200, Y will be 100, and Z will be 120. And what we're going to do is just reparent the door collision to just the door frame and zero out the Y. And there we go. So that's our door collision. So again, door collision parented to the door frame. X and Y is 0 in location, 120 in the Z, just so it matches the floor as best as we can. Scale is all the same. Box extent, X is 200, Y is 100, Z is 120 units. And now the last thing we need to do is update its collision here. So we're going to make it a custom. We're going to do ignore on all collision responses, except for one, and that is pawn. We want to get overlap events. And query only, no physics collisions, exactly what we want. So that so far is done. So now we're going to set up some quick construction scripts just to add a little more functionality here. we're going to need a variable. It's going to be a boolean. We're going to call it b open. We're going to make it a public variable. And this variable is just going to tell us, hey, do we want this door open by default or do we want it closed? So let's grab that, make it a branch out of it. So if we want it open, great. What we need to check now is positive direction or negative direction. Basically, which rotation, which way we could have it rotate open. So we'll need one more variable. We'll call it b positive direction. Make that a public variable. Let's make it true by default. And positive direction really just means like a positive x rotation. So what we'll need to do is just get our door mesh. We're going to use set world rotation. The first place we're going to put this actually is the false of open, because by default we don't want it rotated. So now we need that boolean for positive direction. Do another branch. Just grab this. And we're going to be messing with the yaw, which is z. So positive direction, we need 90. And then false for negative direction, we need negative 90. So now if we just take our new door, throw it in, and then open, there you go. Make it negative, open, there you go. One thing I never really checked, let's just see if it actually rotates correctly. No, it doesn't. Okay, so what we'll need to make sure is actually, let's see if it closes. Yeah, it still closes correctly. What we might need to do is actually do relative. Let's try that. 90. Negative 90. That seems to have worked. Well, no. Let's try set relative rotation here as well. But make it 0, 0, 0. That seems to may have worked. There we go. So we just got to use relative rotation if you want to be able to rotate in different directions, which I assume you do. So I'm sorry about that. I never really tested past that point. But instead of using world rotation, we're just going to do set relative rotation, but using the same values. And one cool little thing we can do actually, instead of using another branch, which is kind of, it's not redundant, but it doesn't look too good, what we can actually use for positive direction is what's called a select. And we're going to choose this one right here. Return the option at index, first option is index 0. And then basically, we can return rotators. So we really just need one. So basically, if positive direction is false, so negative is negative 90. If it's positive, which is true, we return 90. Select is one of the really cool, I think, appreciated blueprint nodes, because it kind of makes things a little cleaner in my opinion. You don't have to use a lot of branches. You can use it with different variables, with like indexes and enums and things like that. So, and you'll notice we still get the same functionality. It's not like we broke anything. So, there you go. Let's just rotate everything back to normal. There we go. So that's the basics, our construction script so far. Just if you want to have it open or close, change direction, stuff like that. So now that that's done, let's actually get to the bare bones scripting of it. So the first thing we want to do is create what we're going to use as a timeline. So this timeline is basically going to be the animation of our door. So let's go ahead and right click, do timeline, add timeline, call it open door. And now let's double click and open it. We're just going to make this a 1 second long timeline, so length 1. And then the next thing we're going to do, we're going to use just a float track we're going to call yaw rotation. Sorry about that. That's Facebook. Let's close that out. We don't need that. So sorry, again, 1 second long length, a float track called yaw rotation, and we're going to go from 0 to 1. And again, you can hold down shift and left click just to create as many of these points as you want. But once you have the 2 points, select it, make sure they're accurate. First point is going to be 0, 0 for time and value. Second one is going to be 1 and 1. And just use these zoom to fit horizontally and vertically buttons just to get the whole timeline here. And then holding it on control, select both of them. And then right click on one, change it to auto, just so we get a nice curve. And that's our timeline. Nothing more than that. Now that we have a timeline set up, what we can do is get our door, set relative rotation, plug that into update, and we're going to want to break this rotation here, so let's split that pin. And what we're going to need to do is linearly interpolate using this timeline as our alpha from one rotation value to another. So let's grab raw rotation, type in lerp. It's automatically going to be put into A, but we want to change that to alpha. And we're going to put in the return value into our yaw. Roll and pitch, they're going to be exactly the same at 0, so we don't have to do anything like that. But the next thing we need to worry about are the 2 points that we want to linearly interpolate from. So the B value is going to, since we're starting open, or starting close I should say, it's going to be the end rotation. So what needs to be affected is our direction. So we need a float variable. It could be integer, but I'm going to make it float. Called direction. Let's compile. Change it to a float. Now this direction variable, it's either going to be positive or it's going to be negative. So we'll determine that in a little bit. But for now, that's what the value is going to be. So we're going to grab that, and we basically want to multiply that value by 90 degrees because that's how much we want the door to open. So we'll do 90, and that's going to go into B. So now what's our A? Our A is going to be our default rotation. And how do we get default rotation? We're going to use the event begin play. So we're going to get the door. And we're going to get relative rotation. And we're going to promote that to a variable, and we'll call it default rotation. So now as soon as we start playing, we get the rotation of our door, or relative rotation. And then all we have to do is grab that, split it, put its yaw as into A. So now what we're basically saying is, 0 to 1, so basically over the course of 1 second, we want to go from our current yaw to our direction times 90 degrees, interpolate that animation, relative rotation, into our yaw, so the door will swing open over the course of 1 second, which is perfect. It's exactly what we want to do. So now, right now, if we do it doesn't really do anything, obviously, because if we play, we just go to it. We can go through it just because of the mesh, but it doesn't do anything. So now we actually have to put in events for our door collision. So let's right click, add event, collision, add on begin overlap. And it might be redundant, but what I'd like to do is just is valid check. Just make sure the actor is valid, just in case, in any case, if a dead body or whatever, or something that's not valid comes into play. It won't happen in this situation, but it's a check I always make, and it doesn't really affect us right now. But then the next thing I want to do is actually cast that actor. We're basically checking, hey, are you a character? Are you our character? So in this case, it's the first-person character. And you can do 2 things. If you always know it, if you're always positive that it's going to be the character, you can right-click, convert to a pure cast. And then you can use, successful to move forward. But for this case, we're going to make it an impure cast. So we have to actually use these executional pins. If this is successful, if that happens, we're going to make this a variable, name it player. So we know, hey, this is the player, this is the guy we want to talk about. And the first thing, again, what we're doing is just opening the door. We're not going to use UI just yet. So what we're going to do, I'd like to create a custom event for this. We're going to call it door open. And what we're going to do is create, let's first compile, get input, get a first person character variable here, call it player. We want to have an input parameter because what we're going to do is compare the location of the player to the location of our door so we can tell which way to rotate pretty much. So we'll get the player, and we'll just reassign that same variable. It's okay to do that here. And what we're going to do is get our open door timeline. We're first going to check if it's playing. Because if it's playing, we really don't want to do anything. So what I like to do is playing, and I'm going to use a not Boolean because I want the no part to be the true. I don't like having the main execution go from false. So we're basically saying, is it not playing? If it's not playing, which is true, you know, that's the good thing, then we would actually do something. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function. We could call it get door swing direction. We're going to ask for player, first person character in this case. I'd like to check if it's valid. If it's not valid, what we want to do is actually, for our output, what we're going to ask for is a direction, a float. That's going to be either positive or negative. So if it's not valid, let's just return 0, because that doesn't really matter. But then what we can do here, in order to get the comparison in direction, is we can get the actor location of our player, and then the actor location or world location of our door. Get the vector length of each. Subtract the player's vector length and the door vector length. So from the player vector length, we're subtracting the door vector length. Then we're going to clamp this value between -1 and 1, and we're going to return that value. Oops. And that's it. So we're going to make this a pure function. That way we don't have to use execution pins. It just returns that value for us. So let's drag that function out. Let's use the player variable here. And then the first thing we're going to do, if this is true, is set our direction to that value. And what we can do is just print. So you can see it's going to be 1 or -1. So what we'll first need to do is call this event. So we named it open or door open. It's asking for a player, and that should be enough for us to see 1 or -1 when we walk up to this door. -1, +1, -1, +1. So if we don't use that clamp, you're going to get still positive and negative numbers based on which side, but clamping it just gives us 1, -1, which is the value that we really want. So now we have that, we can actually play our animation or our timeline. So let's go ahead and grab that open door timeline, and we can actually just pull from it and call play. We want to call play just because instead of play from start is at any point we can open and close it and leave the volume and kind of make it open or close at any point during that animation. Because if we do play from start, there's going to be points where the door's halfway closed, and then we go back into the volume, and then it's going to play from start, meaning it's going to snap back closed and then open again. Whereas we want that smooth transition where it's about to close, but then you go back into it and it opens again from that point. And then the last thing we want to do is from this false, checking if the animation's playing, we're just going to create a small little delay loop of 0.2 seconds and just loop it back in, because we want to constantly be checking if it's closed or not. So creating that loop every 0.2 seconds is going to say, hey, is it open? Is it playing? Is it playing? Is it playing? Is it playing? Okay, it's not playing. Okay, let's open the door. So that's pretty much it. So now if we compile, save, go up to the door, it's going to open. Honestly, if we leave the volume, nothing's going to happen because we haven't scripted that yet, but we know at least the door opens. And we can come from the other side, and you're going to see it snaps because we haven't closed it yet. But we know it's pointing in the right direction. So let's just quickly put in the logic for closing the door. Let's just move things down here. And so we're going to select our door collision component, add event collision and overlap. And we're going to do a lot of the same things here. First, we're going to do isValid and do a cast and assign that player variable so we can just copy things over. It's not a big deal. And just plug in other actor. And now, what we're going to do is just reverse the animation. So let's get our open door, type in reverse, plug it in. Nothing too extravagant, pretty straightforward. So now if we play, go to the door, opens, back out, it reverses, open, close, open, close. Pretty easy. So that's the first part. The next part now is going to be adding UI to the screen. And basically it'll say, press E to open door, and then you press E and it opens the door. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's let the first thing be making our widget here. So let's go right click, user interface, widget blueprint, call it BP underscore UI underscore open door message. Save and open it here. It's going to be pretty easy here. We're just going to put in the text. Size the content. We'll just type it as press E to open door. And we're just going to center this text. So do anchor, center, position X and position Y, 0, 0, and then make alignment 0.5, 0.5, so it is dead center. And then we'll just make the font 40. And just so we can see it, we're going to use a font outline, and that's just be outline size 1. So we just have a little black outline just so you can see it a little better when we're in the game world. So that's it for the actual designer part. In the graph, we're going to need to do a couple things. Let's first go back to our door and just add this UI onto our screen. The first thing we'll need though is a boolean. We'll call it bInteract. Make it a boolean, make it public, just so you have an option when using this door in the level. And now what we'll do, instead of calling door open right here, what we'll do instead is get our boolean interact, do a branch. We'll do a not branch here, not boolean branch, just because I want true to be just the normal walking up and opening, and then the false being the interaction. So true, we'll plug back into door open, then we'll just grab our player variable, put it back into player. Now we're going to create a new function. This function is going to add our UI to our screen. So we'll just call it add open door UI to screen. This again is going to ask for a player. So first person character, we'll just name it player. And what we can do really is, again, what we're going to do is valid check just because I'm crazy. But what we're going to do is then from isValid, we're going to do create widget. And we're going to use bp_ui_open_door_message. We're going to make this a variable to return value. And we're just going to call it interact UI. And then from that, we're going to add to viewport. Now the last thing we need to do is give it an owning player. So what I like to do here is just get controller and cast to player controller. And that's always going to be the case, at least in this instance, and plug that in. So just to go over again, we check if the player is valid. If he is, we create that UI, assign it to our player controller, initialize it as a variable, and add it to our viewport. So now, from our false, we just call that variable, call that function, add open door to UI screen, put in our player variable, and that's pretty much it. So now, if we go up to our door, we should see this open. Oh, we forgot to make it interact. So let's do that. So now if we interact, proceed to open door. Obviously if we press E, we're not going to get anything, which is fine. We're just getting this error because I have some of the stuff hooked up from before, from the original content. So don't worry about that just yet. But now that we have the UI showing up, what we would need to do now is go into our first person character. I have some stuff hooked up here. This is for the multiplayer related stuff, so just ignore it for now. I have my own custom action map here. If you don't know how to make an action mapping, I'll show you real quick. You can just go to your project settings. Under engine, there's an input section. Click on that. There's action and axis mappings. Just go to action mapping. You'll see some here by default like jump, fire, reset, VR, and then I made my own here. I called it interact. To create your own, just hit this plus sign at the top. You'll add one to this list. Name it whatever you want, and then assign any key or gamepad value you want. I chose E, just because that's how our UI is set up, so we use E. And then when you have that set up, you can go into your first person character, and just right click, type in interact, and you'll see action events interact. And what we want to do is create an event dispatcher. If you don't know how event dispatchers work, I'll put a link in the video right now to one of the videos I made about that, so you can take a look at that and come back. But basically, it's just an event that we can then call from any other blueprint whenever our character decides to interact. So what we're going to do is call interacted. And that's it. That's all we're going to do on our character right now. So we can go back into our UI. And what we're going to do, we're going to get rid of the tick event. We don't need that. We're going to create a custom event. We're going to call assign player interacted. What we're going to do is get our owning player pawn. We're going to do another isValid check. We're then going to cast a first person character. And for this one, we can use a pure cast just because we know it's going to be a first person character. We don't have any questions about whether or not our pawn is not the first person character. And then what we're going to do, we're going to do assign interacted, which is that event dispatcher we just made. And then from isValid, connect that here to that binding. And then let's just name this event player interacted. And then what I like to do at the same time here is copy all of this part here, the owning pawn, the casting, and the valid check, paste it again, make a new custom event, call it unbind player interacted. Because we really want to unbind events if we don't need to. And then from the first person character, we could just search for unbind interacted. And then just plug that event pin into our event that we just created here. And then from the main event player interacted, what we can do, first we want to remove this from the parent. We want the UI to go away. And then what we can then do is do an event dispatcher from here. we'll just do this. We'll call it interacted as well. Hopefully that doesn't confuse anybody because the name's pretty much the same, but it's pretty straightforward from there. Just make sure you know which one you're talking about. And then we're just going to call that. So that's basically all of our logic. So now what we need to do from construct here is assign player interacted, that event we just created down here. And then on destruct of this UI, so destruct, we can then call unbind. And then what I typically like to do is just take all this nonsense that we just created here, collapse the nodes, and we'll just call player interacted logic. So that is now our UI. So now, let's go ahead and play. So we press E, and as we can tell, the UI does go away now, but the door still doesn't open. So now what we really need to do is make it so that the door opens. Obviously, we need to make sure that the interaction then works when we press E. Okay, now that we have the call interacted, or just the interacted event dispatcher, what we can do is go back into our door, and then there's that function for add open door UI to screen. And what we can do is just this function, let's have it return that UI. So we can just plug in that return node, and then the interact UI, we can just have it. If you just put it into the return node, it'll create that pin for us. We can then just take out that old param. Now we have our interact UI, and now we have it taken out there. So we can reference it outside the function. So what we can do with that is do assign interacted. We can just bind that. And we'll do UI interacted. Just move things out of the way here. So basically, now that the UI is interacted with, what can we call? We can call door open. So we could just copy and paste that. So now, if we compile and save and play, go up to it, press E, and the door opens. And then it closes, go back up to it, press E to open door, and it all works. So that's pretty much it. Let me just think, do we want to, yeah, what we'll want to do is when the player exits that collision volume, what we'll want to do is just unbind that event here. So when it's reversed, we can do is valid. And then if that interact UI is valid, we'll want to do one of two things. If it's valid, we'll want to remove from parent. So that's to say, if we walk up to the door and don't open it, so walk up, walk out, now it actually leaves the screen. But because since we're exiting the volume, we do remove parent. But if we press E, it removes it because of that call interacted binding that we created in the UI itself. And then once that's done, we'll want to call unbind the event from interacted. We can just connect that this way. And the last thing I like to do is just set it to none, just so it's not valid anymore. And that's it. So that last part I kind of breezed through a little quickly, I think. So just to go over it again, kind of from scratch. In our character, we have that input action interact event that we created in the project settings. And from the pressed here, we call an event dispatcher called interacted. And that's all we're doing in the character. Then we have our UI. Our UI just says press E to open door. But then the logic here on construct, we assign the player's binding for that interacted dispatcher we just created. We also created an unbinding section for that once the UI is destroyed. And basically, player interacted, this gets called when that dispatcher gets called, or when we press E. So when we press E, the following logic is called. First, we remove this UI from the parent, and then we make a call to our new interactive event dispatcher that's in the UI. So then in the door, on overlap, we check first if this is where we want to interact. If it is, we go down here, and we add the UI to the screen. So we check if the player is valid, we get its controller, we create that widget, we initialize its variable, we add it to the viewport, and then we also return that UI. And then from that UI return, we bind that interacted event from the event dispatcher right here. We bind it and assign it to an event called door open, and we pass through the player. So now when the player presses E, we remove from parent, we call this new event, it calls door open, and the door opens. And then before, the non-interaction one, the much simpler one, pretty much on overlap, door opens. And then we have our timeline up here using relative rotation. We set our default rotation on event begin play. And then when we exit the door volume or the door collision volume, we reverse the door animation. We check if the interact UI is valid. If it is, we remove it from the parent, we unbind that event, and we also reset it to null so that it can get overwritten again. And then our door open event, we get the player, check, assign it back to our player variable. We check to see if the door animation is playing or the timeline's playing. If it is playing, we do a delay and loop back and check again every 0.2 seconds. If it is not playing, we use the player, compare its location to the door location, subtract their vector lengths and clamp it between -1 and 1. We assign that value to direction, and then we play the door timeline. And again, our door timeline just linearly interpolates between the default yaw rotation that we set at the start, and interpolate that to the direction, which is a -1 or 1 value, multiplied by 90 for 90 degrees. And we interpolate that over the time of 1 second using this curve and set the relative rotation of our door. And again, our results, without interact, walk up to it, door opens, door closes, and it works for either direction. If we set it to interact, press E, it opens, closes, opens, closes. So that's going to be the end for this video. In the next video, like I said, we're going to take what we just made and have it work for multiplayer. And to get this to work for multiplayer, we're going to be changing a lot of things. For example, like our UI is not going to need that dispatcher event anymore. We're going to need to add the UI to our screen in a very unique way. We're going to have to do a couple other things and change the event types and everything like that. So look forward to that. I want to say thanks for watching. If you liked the video, make sure to like the video and comment as well, letting me know what your thoughts are. If you have any suggestions for other videos, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Any bit helps. So I appreciate it. Until the next video, guys, I'll see you later.
I just wanna run to you and break